Daniel had never imagined that a single decision, made in the space of a heartbeat, would change his entire life. He was just a soldier, assigned to guard duty on what seemed like another routine diplomatic mission. His commanders told him that the task was simple: keep an eye on the alien delegation, make sure peace talks went smoothly, and never draw too much attention. To Daniel, it was nothing special. He had been on similar duties before, and he thought, this one would pass quietly like the others. The royal convoy was impressive, unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Sleek ships moved in formation, their metallic surfaces shining like mirrors under the distant suns. Inside the main vessel, the alien queen and her daughter, the princess, traveled with their royal guard. Daniel had only caught glimpses of them from afar. The queen carried herself with dignity, while the princess, young, curious, and graceful, seemed fascinated by everything around her, including the humans who accompanied them. For Daniel, the aliens were still a mystery. Their appearance was not frightening but otherworldly. Their skin carried faint, shimmering tones, as if touched by starlight, and their eyes reflected a depth that humans could hardly describe. Their voices were soft, yet carried strength. Daniel respected them, but he kept his distance. He knew his role: watch, protect, but never interfere in royal matters. The mission continued smoothly for the first few days. The humans and aliens shared meals, exchanged words of culture, and prepared for the upcoming peace conference. Daniel often stood silently in the background, helmet under his arm, scanning the hall for signs of danger. To him, everything seemed under control. Yet deep inside, he knew peace was fragile. He had been trained to expect trouble when things appeared too calm. That trouble came faster than anyone expected. It happened in the vastness of space, when the convoy moved through a region of darkness between stars. One moment everything was quiet. The next, alarms blared across the ship. Daniel felt the floor tremble as energy blasts struck the shields. Enemy ships emerged from the shadows, their weapons flashing like thunder. The alien royal guard moved quickly, forming protective lines around the queen and princess. Daniel's instincts took over. The corridor erupted with chaos. Shouts echoed, smoke filled the air, and the glow of weapons lit the walls. Daniel was stationed only a few steps from the princess when the first strike came too close. A section of the ceiling collapsed, sending shards and debris raining down. Without thinking, he dashed forward, raising his arms to shield her from the falling wreckage. The princess gasped, wide-eyed, as he pulled her into his chest and took the brunt of the strike across his armor. Pain shot through his body, but he refused to let go. He turned his back to the danger, keeping the princess safe against him while sparks and flames erupted around them. The alien guards fought fiercely, but in that moment, Daniel became her shield. His body, his armor, and his will stood between her and the chaos that threatened her life. When the attack subsided for a brief moment, Daniel pushed the princess toward the safety of her mother's guards. "Stay close to them," he urged, his voice steady despite the ache in his body. The princess looked at him with a mix of fear and awe. She had never seen a human act so recklessly for her sake. The queen noticed as well. From her position, she had witnessed Daniel's sacrifice. The sight of a human soldier, who had no royal duty, choosing to protect her daughter at the risk of his own life, struck something deep within her heart. She gave a sharp order to her guards. "Keep him near." It was not just a command for safety. It was the first sign of the bond that would soon tie him to her family. The battle raged on, but Daniel did not retreat. Even after being pushed back with the others, he stayed near the princess, deflecting debris, guiding her through smoke-filled corridors, and using his training to anticipate every danger. To him, it was simple. He had sworn to protect, and that promise meant everything, no matter who stood before him. As the convoy finally escaped, the ambush and the enemy ships retreated into the void. Silence returned. The royal vessel limped forward, damaged but intact. The queen gathered her daughter close, and the alien court began to recover from the shock. Daniel, covered in dust and bruises, stood quietly to the side, catching his breath. He did not expect thanks. He had only done what he thought was right. Yet the princess would not let him fade into the background. She walked toward him, her small steps echoing in the damaged corridor. Looking up at him with eyes that shimmered like the stars outside, she whispered, "You saved me." Daniel nodded, unsure of what to say. For him, actions spoke louder than words. The queen, however, spoke with clarity. She stepped forward, her gaze steady on the human soldier. "From this day," she declared, her voice carrying authority that silenced the hall, "you are no longer just a guard. You are the one who stood between my child and death. That is not something I can ignore." Daniel lowered his head respectfully, unsure of what her words truly meant. He thought it was simple gratitude, nothing more. But in truth, the Queen's declaration was only the beginning of a chain of events that would bind him to a destiny far beyond his imagination. As the convoy repaired and moved forward, whispers spread among the alien court. Some admired the human's courage. Others doubted his place among them, but all agreed that his actions had changed something forever. The princess, who once carried worry and fear in her eyes, now smiled when Daniel stood nearby. She began to follow him with her gaze, trusting him in ways even her own guards had not earned. Daniel did not yet realize it, but the moment he raised his arms to shield the princess, his life stopped belonging only to himself. The alien queen had seen, the court had noticed, and the princess had felt it. His fate was no longer in his own hands. After the attack on the royal convoy, life aboard the alien vessel slowly returned to order. Repairs were carried out in every corridor, guards doubled their watch, and the crew walked with more caution. Yet, for Daniel, things had changed in a way he had not expected. He was no longer just another human soldier standing in the background. The princess now looked for him every time she entered a room, and the queen's eyes lingered on him with a kind of silent calculation, as if she was weighing the meaning of what he had done. Daniel did not seek attention. He never had. He preferred to stand quietly at his post, blending into the shadows of duty, but the memory of the moment still clung to him. He could feel the ache in his body from the strike he had taken, and sometimes he caught himself replaying the scene in his mind, the princess's terrified eyes, the crash of debris, and the way he had thrown himself forward without hesitation. It had not been a choice he thought about. It was instinct, the same instinct that had carried him through battles before. Protect the innocent, protect the vulnerable. That was the heart of a soldier. The princess, however, saw it differently. To her, Daniel was no longer just a protector assigned by duty. He was the reason she was alive. Every time she walked past him, she would pause. Sometimes she tried to speak, shy at first, her voice quiet, but her questions grew bolder with each day. "Does it hurt?" she once asked, touching her own chest as if feeling the blow he had taken. Daniel shook his head with a small smile. "Nothing I can't handle," he replied. She tilted her head, studying him as though humans were puzzles she had never been able to solve. Slowly, their conversations grew. She asked about Earth, what the skies looked like, whether the oceans really stretched farther than the eye could, see what flowers smelled like in the spring. Daniel answered patiently, painting pictures with simple words that made her eyes sparkle with wonder. In return, she told him about her own world. She spoke of towers that touched the skies, forests that glowed under twin moons, and songs sung by her people that could calm storms. Each word carried the weight of tradition, and Daniel listened carefully, realizing how different yet strangely familiar their lives could be. The bond between them did not go unnoticed. The royal guards whispered among themselves, exchanging glances whenever the princess laughed near Daniel. Some looked uneasy, others curious, but none dared question the queen's silence on the matter. The queen herself observed closely. She saw how her daughter's smile returned in Daniel's presence, how her fear of the attack faded when he was nearby. For a mother, that mattered more than politics or traditions. One evening, after the long day of travel, the queen summoned Daniel to her private chamber. He entered with caution, bowing his head respectfully. The chamber was vast, filled with glowing crystals that pulsed softly like living stars. The queen stood tall, her presence commanding, her robes flowing like rivers of light. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You risked your life for my daughter," she said, her voice steady, yet carrying an emotion he could not fully name. "You had no obligation to do so. Why?" Daniel raised his eyes, meeting hers with honesty. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because she is young, and no child should face death if I can prevent it." The Queen's gaze softened ever so slightly. "Many claim to serve, but few act without hesitation. You are different, human." She turned, her robe trailing like water, before adding, "My daughter feels safe around you. That is a rare gift. Do you understand the meaning of that?" Daniel was silent for a moment, unsure how to answer. He only nodded. From that day, the Queen allowed Daniel to stay closer to the princess, not just as a guard, but as a companion of trust. He accompanied her through the halls during meals, even during moments of study when she practiced the traditions of her people. Daniel felt the strangeness of it all, how quickly he had moved from shadow to presence. But he did not resist. He saw the way the princess laughed freely again, and he knew if his presence gave her peace, then it was worth the unease it brought him. The days turned into weeks. Their bond grew deeper, woven by small moments. Daniel taught her simple human games, ones that required nothing more than quick hands or clever thought. She introduced him to alien stories sung in gentle tones that seemed to dance in the air like music itself. They began to share meals, and though the food of her people was strange to his tongue, he ate without complaint, earning her quiet laughter when his face betrayed surprise at the taste. Through it all, Daniel never forgot his place. He was a soldier, bound by duty, not privilege. But the princess blurred those lines, not with command, but with innocence. She often called him her guardian, a word spoken with warmth that left Daniel uneasy yet oddly proud. The whispers in the court grew louder. Some nobles questioned the closeness, fearing that a human's presence could weaken traditions. Others admired the courage that had forged such trust. The Queen listened to all, but her decision remained silent. She knew her daughter's heart, and she knew the one truth that silenced all doubts. Without Daniel, her child would not be alive. One night, when the stars outside the ship's windows burned brighter than usual, the princess confessed something to Daniel. "When the attack happened, I thought I would never see my mother again. I thought everything would end, but then you were there. You didn't let me fall." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you know what that means to me?" Daniel looked at her, unsure how to respond. He could feel the weight of her words, heavy with gratitude and something deeper. "It means," he said finally, "that I did my duty." But the princess shook her head softly. "No, it means you are more than duty. You are my protector." Daniel fell silent. He realized then that the bond was no longer one-sided. It was not just the princess who had grown attached, it was himself as well. He cared for her safety more than he admitted, more than he should. And though he tried to remind himself that his home was Earth, his heart whispered something different. Every time she looked at him with those shining eyes, the Queen too saw this truth. She saw it in her daughter's laughter, in the way Daniel stood taller near her, in the quiet moments they shared. And while others debated politics and alliances, she knew in her heart that a seed had been planted. The seed of a bond that crossed species, traditions, and expectations. Daniel did not yet realize how deep that bond would pull him, nor how fiercely the Queen would guard it. For now, he simply stood by the princess's side, unaware that his fate was already being written in the hearts of those he had sworn to protect. When the ship finally reached safe territory, the humans prepared to return to their own fleet. For Daniel, it should have been a relief. He had done his job, survived the attack, and kept the alien princess safe. That was all his commanders had asked of him. Soon he would be back among his own people, back to his life as a soldier who followed orders without question. But nothing felt simple anymore. The princess looked at him differently now. Every morning when he came near, her face brightened. She would greet him first even before speaking to her attendants. She no longer saw him as just a soldier in armor. She saw him as someone she trusted, someone who had risked everything for her. Daniel felt the weight of that trust. It was not the kind of bond a man could walk away from easily. The Queen, too, had changed in her treatment of him. Where once she looked at him as an outsider, now her eyes carried a certain thoughtfulness whenever they met. She asked questions about his world, about human loyalty, about the meaning of sacrifice. Daniel answered honestly, but he kept his words simple. He did not see himself as special. To him, what he had done during the attack was only what any soldier should do. Yet the Queen did not see it that way. When the time came for the humans to leave, the atmosphere aboard the alien ship grew tense. Daniel's fellow soldiers packed their things and prepared to depart. He did the same, though slower than His hands moved mechanically as he gathered his gear, but his mind kept drifting back to the princess. He wondered if she would come to say goodbye. She did. On the final evening before departure, she entered the hall where he stood alone, checking his armor. She wore a simple gown of her people, glowing faintly under the soft lights, and her expression carried both sadness and determination. "You are leaving," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Yes. My duty here is finished." The princess stepped closer, her voice trembling. "But who will protect me now? Who will stand in front of me when danger comes again?" Her words struck Daniel's heart more deeply than any wound ever had. He wanted to tell her that her guards would keep her safe, that her mother would make sure no harm came near her. But the truth was, he didn't know if that was enough. He had seen her fear, felt her trembling in his arms when the attack rained down. He knew how fragile life could be. "You'll be safe," he said softly, trying to convince both her and himself. "Your people will watch over you." The princess shook her head. "It isn't the same." Her eyes glistened as if she were holding back tears. "You are not like the others. You didn't protect me because of orders. You protected me because you wanted to. That is why I feel safe with you." Daniel had no answer. He only bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze. The next day, the farewell ceremony was arranged. The humans lined up ready to return to their ship. The alien court gathered as well, their eyes watching every detail. At the center stood the Queen, regal and commanding. Daniel stood with his unit, waiting for the formal words of thanks and farewell. But what happened next stunned everyone. The Queen raised her hand, silencing the hall. Her gaze swept over the crowd before resting firmly on Daniel. "This human," she declared, her voice echoing like thunder, "is not free to leave." A wave of shock rippled through both humans and aliens alike. Daniel froze, certain he had misheard. His commander stepped forward, confusion written across his face. "Your Majesty, with respect, he is one of ours. His duty is complete. He must return to us." The Queen's eyes narrowed, her voice firm and unyielding. "He saved my daughter's life. He risked his own without hesitation. That is not something I will forget. He belongs here now, by her side. He will not be released." Murmurs filled the hall. The alien nobles exchanged startled looks. The humans shifted uncomfortably, their discipline faltering under the weight of such unexpected words. The princess, standing near her mother, looked both relieved and anxious. She had not expected her mother to speak so boldly, yet she could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest at hearing it. Daniel, however, stood frozen. He had always followed orders, always done what was expected of him. Never before had he been claimed in such a way, not by his own commanders, and certainly not by a queen of another world. He felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. His commander tried again. "With all respect, Majesty, he is a soldier under human command. His service to you has been honorable, but he must return." The Queen's voice grew sharper. "No. My daughter lives because of him. His bond to her is greater than the chain of your orders. To remove him now would be to wound her spirit. I will not allow it. Silence followed her words. No one dared challenge her further. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to speak, to protest, to tell the queen that he could not simply abandon his own people. But when he looked at the princess, standing there with hope shining in her eyes, his words died in his throat. He saw the way her small hands clenched as if she feared he might be taken from her. He saw the silent plea written in her gaze. The humans were dismissed, forced to return to their ship without him. Daniel remained behind, standing in the great hall as the queen's words echoed in his ears. He was not free to leave. He was bound, not by chains of iron, but by the will of a queen and the bond of a princess who refused to let him go. That night Daniel sat alone in his chamber, his thoughts heavy. He had never felt so torn. His duty as a soldier told him he belonged with his unit, under the command of his people. Yet his heart whispered that perhaps his place truly was here, beside the princess who trusted him more than anyone else. He did not know which voice to follow. The queen visited him once more, her presence filling the room with calm authority. You may not yet understand, she said, but your life has changed. My daughter looks to you not as a guard, but as a protector of her soul. If you leave, you will break her spirit. If you stay, you will give her strength. I will not allow her to lose you. Daniel listened in silence, unable to argue. He realized then that the queen was not simply making a demand. She was protecting her child in the only way she knew how. And whether he wanted it or not, he had become part of that protection. In the days that followed, the alien court adjusted to his continued presence. Some welcomed it, praising his bravery. Others frowned, uneasy with the queen's decision. But no matter what they thought, one truth was clear. Daniel was no longer free to choose his own path. His destiny had been rewritten in the moment he shielded the princess, and now the queen herself refused to let him go. Daniel had always thought of himself as a man of clear duties. Orders were given and he followed them. His life had been shaped by structure, by discipline, by the unspoken understanding that a soldier's place was with his unit. Yet now, every day he remained in the alien palace, that certainty began to slip further away. The queen's decision had shocked everyone, himself most of all. He had expected gratitude, maybe a few words of thanks before returning to his ship. Instead, he had been claimed, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as something far more complicated. The queen had declared that he could not leave, that his bond to her daughter outweighed any order from his commanders. And though Daniel could still remember the faces of his fellow soldiers as they left without him, what haunted him most was not their expressions, but the princess's relief. She had smiled through her tears when she realized he would remain. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel slowly became part of the royal household. He accompanied the princess in her lessons, stood beside her during ceremonies, and walked with her through the palace gardens that glowed beneath twin moons. At first he felt out of place. The halls were filled with nobles whose eyes followed him with suspicion, whispering words he could not understand. He was an outsider, a human among beings who valued tradition and heritage above all else. Yet, with every passing day, the bond between him and the princess grew stronger. She no longer called him by his title or position. Instead, she addressed him by name, with a warmth that softened the stares of even the most critical nobles. Daniel found himself laughing at her jokes, teaching her little phrases in his own language, and listening to her sing in tones that carried the weight of her people's history. In her presence, he no longer felt like a soldier stripped from his unit. He felt like something more, though he could not yet define what. Still, the conflict in his heart remained. At night, when the palace grew silent, he thought of Earth. He thought of his comrades, his duty, the oath he had sworn. His commanders had not forgotten him, he knew this. Messages had been sent, demanding his return. The queen always refused, her words final. He belongs here, she would say, and no argument could shake her decision. This tension spilled into the royal court. The human fleet continued to pressure for Daniel's release, threatening to withdraw from peace talks if he was not returned. The queen, however, stood firm. To her, Daniel was not a bargaining piece. He was her daughter's shield, a protector chosen by fate. She refused to see him reduced to anything less. Daniel found himself caught between two worlds. His loyalty to his people gnawed at him like a blade pressed against his heart. Yet every time he considered asking the queen to let him go, the image of the princess's face rose in his mind. He remembered the fear in her eyes during the attack, the way her small hand had clung to his after. To walk away now felt like a betrayal not only to her but to the bond they had forged. One evening, as he stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing city below, the princess joined him. She was quiet at first, her gaze fixed on the stars. Finally, she whispered, "Do you wish to leave?" The question struck Daniel like a blow. He turned to her, searching for the meaning behind her words. Her voice trembled as she continued, "I see how you look at the sky. You think of your home, don't you?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think of my people, my world, my duty." The princess lowered her head. "And what of me? Am I not also your duty?" Her words cut deeper than any command. Daniel wanted to tell her she was more than duty, but the words stuck in his throat. He could not promise what he was not sure of himself. Instead, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are important to me," he said softly. "More than you know." She looked up at him then, her eyes shimmering like pools of starlight. For a moment, the war inside him grew quiet. In that silence, he realized something he had not admitted even to himself. His place was no longer defined by orders alone. It was defined by the trust of the one he had saved. But the outside world did not rest. The humans grew louder in their demands. Diplomats argued, threats were exchanged, and tensions rose higher than ever before. Daniel heard whispers that war itself could reignite if the queen did not release him. He felt the weight of that responsibility, crushing him. If he stayed, he risked peace between their species. If he left, he risked breaking the spirit of the princess who now saw him as her protector. The queen saw his torment. One night, she called him to her chamber once more. "You are torn," she said, her eyes steady upon him. "But know this. My daughter's happiness is not something I will sacrifice for politics. You may think of yourself as a soldier bound to orders, but to her, you are far more. And to me, you are the one who proved that trust can exist between our kinds. That is why I cannot release you." Daniel listened, his chest heavy. He wanted to argue, but deep down, he understood. The queen was not acting as a ruler in that moment. She was acting as a mother. The days that followed tested him more than any battle ever had. Every conversation with the princess reminded him of the bond they shared. Every message from his people reminded him of the loyalty he owed. The weight of two worlds pressed upon his shoulders, and he knew that no matter what he chose, someone would be left in pain. He had become more than a soldier. He had become the thread that tied two very different lives together, and he feared that when the time came to choose, that thread might snap under the strain. Daniel had learned to navigate the alien world, yet the feeling of being caught between two worlds never left him. Every day he walked through the halls of the palace, greeted by nobles and attendants who still regarded him with suspicion, and every day he saw the princess whose eyes carried trust and hope. It was a strange existence, one that tested the limits of his patience, loyalty, and heart. Despite the queen's refusal to release him, Daniel did not feel entirely trapped. He knew that his presence brought comfort and joy to the princess. He had witnessed her laugh again, play without fear, and learn without anxiety. And in return, she had become more than a young royal to him. She was a reminder of why courage mattered, why sacrifice mattered, and why connection across worlds could change lives. Yet he could not ignore his past entirely. His thoughts often returned to Earth, to his comrades, to the life he had left behind. Each message from his superiors reminded him of obligations and duties that were still expected. But the more he tried to focus on returning, the more he realized that his life had shifted irreversibly. Protecting the princess had become a defining moment, one that could not be undone. As days turned to weeks, Daniel began to explore the palace grounds with the princess. She taught him about her people's customs, the ancient songs that held their history, and the lessons her mother had once given her about courage and wisdom. He listened, learning, and sometimes laughing at her attempts to teach him. They shared small adventures within the palace walls, wandering through glowing gardens, exploring hidden halls and observing creatures unique to her world. Through these moments, Daniel came to understand that protection was not just about standing between danger and someone. Protection meant understanding, patience, and trust. It meant knowing when to step back and when to step forward. The princess had taught him that, and in return, he had given her courage she had never known she possessed. But the outside world continued to press. The humans were becoming impatient, their messages increasingly urgent. Some of their envoys visited the palace, demanding Daniel's return, insisting that his duty as a soldier came before anything else. The queen, however, remained firm. She welcomed the envoys with grace, listening to their arguments, but always returning to one truth. Daniel had become more than a soldier. He had become a protector chosen not by command, but by heart. The tension created whispers in the court. Nobles debated whether the queen had acted correctly, whether the humans might see this as a sign of weakness. Yet no one dared openly challenge her. The princess's happiness and safety were not matters of political debate. They were matters of trust, life, and loyalty, and the queen's resolve was unshakable. One evening, Daniel found himself alone with the princess in a quiet garden. The air was cool and the soft glow of alien flowers lit their path. She turned to him, her expression serious. "Do you ever think about going home?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated. He had thought about it constantly, the tug of duty never far from his mind. "I do," he admitted. "I think about it every day." Her eyes, reflecting the starlight, grew gentle. "And yet you stay." "Yes," he said, his voice low. "Because I cannot leave you. Not after what happened." The princess reached out, placing a small hand on his arm. "And I would not want you to. You saved me, Daniel, but more than that, you stayed. That means everything." Her words settled in his heart, quiet yet powerful. He realized then that his choice was no longer about duty or command. It was about loyalty, trust, and a bond that had been forged in a single, terrifying moment of crisis. Protecting her was no longer a job. It was a calling, one that had become inseparable from his own sense of purpose. The queen noticed this growing understanding between them. She had watched Daniel struggle with his feelings, his loyalty, and his place in her world. She had seen him wrestle with his desire to return home, while simultaneously recognizing that staying was the right choice, and so she gave him space to choose, allowing him to find the answer himself. Over the following months, Daniel and the princess became inseparable in the ways that mattered most. They trained together in defense and strategy, studied together in the palace library, and shared quiet moments where conversation was not needed at all. Each day the bond grew stronger, unspoken, but undeniable. Daniel began to understand that he could find purpose here, not just as a soldier, but as someone whose courage and heart truly mattered. Yet life was never simple. The humans continued to request his return, and Daniel's thoughts, sometimes, drifted to what he had left behind. He thought of friends, routines, and a world he had known all his life. But every time he considered leaving, he remembered the fear in the princess's eyes during the attack, the way she had clung to him, the relief and joy she showed every day since. And each time, he knew that to leave her now would be a betrayal, far worse than defying orders. One day, the queen summoned him. Her expression was calm but firm as always. "Daniel," she said, "you have learned much about our world, and we have learned much about yours. The bond between you and my daughter is not something to be broken lightly. Your decision will shape more than your life. It will shape the future of our people and the trust between our worlds." Daniel bowed his head. "Your Majesty, I understand." I do not take this lightly, but I also know what I must do." The queen studied him silently for a moment before nodding. "Then do what your heart tells you, Daniel. You are free in choice, though not in absence. Remember that your courage brought you here, and it is courage that will guide you onward." In the days that followed, Daniel came to his final realization. He belonged here, not because he had been forced to stay, not because the queen demanded it, but because his heart had chosen it. The princess's safety, happiness, and trust had become inseparable from his own purpose. He understood that protecting her was not just a duty. It was a commitment he could honor willingly. The humans eventually withdrew, their fleet moving on with diplomatic missions, though messages of hope and warning remained. Daniel no longer felt torn. He had found his place, not in obedience to orders, but in loyalty, love, and courage. The princess remained at his side, her laughter a constant reminder of why he had chosen to stay. And in the quiet moments, when the stars glimmered over the alien world and the palace hummed with life, Daniel understood that his life had changed forever. The act of shielding a young princess in the heat of danger had bound him to a destiny he could never have imagined. Yet in that destiny he had found purpose, belonging, and a new understanding of what it meant to truly protect someone. For Daniel, the future was no longer a question of duty alone. It was a path he would walk willingly, step by step, side by side with the princess he had saved. And though challenges would come, as they always did in any world, he knew that together they could face anything. His heart, once torn between worlds, had found its place. And in finding it, he had discovered that courage, sacrifice, and loyalty could transcend species, worlds, and the boundaries of expectation.